The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around. What do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters. The very minds of the people we are trying to save. Until we do, these people are still part of that system. That makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Are you listening to me, Leo? Are you listening? Are you listening? Are you listening?
Personally, I'm a bit obsessive about the pursuit of not being wrong, which is very different than the pursuit of truth. I find that reality is unknowable, and each individual has their own truth. My work is about the bigger societal picture of what builds a safe and free community. I discovered that understanding policing was really about understanding crime, and understanding crime was really about understanding human behavior. From this path, I have made claims that I wish to be held to the strongest levels of debate and scrutiny. Anyone willing to publicly debate anything I have stated, please reach out and do it. There is no need to write cowardly articles or play gossip girls on social media. I'm right here. Anything about policing, gun control, violence, crime, race, mass organizations, media, and such. Email info@imembermedia.com. And someone will respond to arrange a discussion to be posted right here on the Nuance podcast and video broadcast. Here are some of the arguments I make that supposedly have many willing to debate but never seem to show up. Not a single police department is fighting the things that cause crime. All violence is a biological malfunction. There are 4 outstanding correlates to violence and crime. In order of prominence, they are environmental toxins, resource inequality, local instability, and the use of state-sanctioned violence. The Second Amendment prevents the superior right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Second Amendment is the recipe of police killings. That means killing cops and killer cops. The difference between gender and sex is simple, and there are limitless genders. There is no such thing as being transgender. I have found that the history of American policing has a foundation of 3 pillars which continue to define the fundamental functions of policing in the United States. They are the first and primary pillar of American policing, the creation and maintenance of oppressed classes, from which resources are extracted to institute continued oppression. Second is the valuing of superior class property over the lives of oppressed classes. And third, the continued genocide of the indigenous nations of North America. All media pundits are phony intellectuals and will only debate the ignorant or other media pundits who are in on the game. It is impossible for the current structures to fix policing to serving the people. The police must be restructured to take orders from the community, not institutional power systems. There is no free will. And I'm sure there are plenty more if you choose to look. So if any of these or any of those strike you or are something you want to argue, then do not just sit there. If you think your favorite pundit will destroy me in a debate, then do not tell me. I don't give a damn. Petition them to further the discussion. I will always be respectful. I will not insult, but I will do the most offensive thing that you can do to another person. I will treat you like an equal. Email info@imembermedia.com or go to the website imembermedia.com. Reach out. In this episode of Nuance, we attempt to understand our matrix a little bit further by exploring some of the differences between the environmentalist perspective and the humanist perspective. It was not that long ago that I talked to the environmentalist who answered the call to debate, Patrick Farnsworth. In our previous conversation, we stayed on the policing topics for the most part, and then a very familiar path followed. It seems to me that most of us are focused on the outcomes of things, and we people agree with the outcomes. uh, And when people agree with the outcomes, then we think that we are aligned in our principles. But that is almost never true. I am deeply focused on the systems and processes that got us here. I do not care about the outcome. I care about the best process. For example, through critical thinking and evaluating the science, I saw the institutional flaws of the criminal justice system. But when I applied those same skills in science to how to reform the system, Black Lives Matter started to disagree with me. Why? Well, I fight violence and oppression, and the official organization was fighting to oppress and accumulate power. This has proven to be true with more than the Black Lives Matter movement. All of the newspapers I have written in, all of the hundreds of media I have dealt with, most of the activists, all of the politicians, all of the ideologies, and here in this case with environmentalism. I give some media expectations, the most outstanding of which is Dave Smith, comicdavesmith.com, a mostly libertarian thinker who is 100% intellectually honest in my assessment. I also give Jesse Lee Peterson credit. He says outrageous things, I know, but I have no doubt that he has good intentions and a big heart. Tim Pool's another one, and there are some others that I'm drawing a blank on. But for the most part, all of them prove to be tools of the system and in pursuit of self-interest. A few I have particular issue with, but feel I should avoid saying anything because it is called an offensive attack or an offensive attack, and uh, and used as an excuse to avoid the issue. Offensive, offensive. I don't know why I feel like those are different things. I'm thinking like football, and then to be offended, offensive. Same word. Never mind. Same concept. I don't know what I'm thinking there. Most people place me in the left, but I really could not care less. And it is could not care less. Not could care less. Anyway, I could not care less about that stuff. The tribes and isms are all about obtaining the power to oppress others. So I will be praised and the science will be praised until it produces an outcome that goes against the particular tribe or ism. Keeping on the police reform issue for easy understanding, an example. The Black Lives Matter organization, and be clear about the organization, not the grassroots communities who fight locally. The Black Lives Matter organization promoted and continues to promote more black officers as a solution to police excessive use of force. But all the science, all of the data, all of my personal experience, NWA themselves, and much more says black cops are not are just not a solution. They are more excessive in their use of force. So does that need to be explored? Of course. But regardless, if you start pushing for more black cops, then you are going to get more violence. You will have more black victims of police brutality. One of the biggest issues in Standing Rock was all of the competing ideologies and power grabs. That's what destroyed the whole thing. The largest cluster of ideologies bringing people to Standing Rock was not Native American rights or police brutality. It was environmentalism. Some of the environmentalists wanted to destroy modern civilization with bombs, others with obstruction, others with peace and love. But for every ism, power was required. Ultimately, the tribal power struggles ruled the day, and I began to wake up to the lack of principles in those surrounding and promoting me. Once you try to discuss these differences, those who have shouted the most about listening and treating people with respect refuse to engage in honest dialogue, begin insulting the character of anyone who questions their statements, and then work to exercise the violence of silence on any heretics. As it has been with many, this has been the path with Patrick, and I would be surprised if we were to ever be able to resume dialogue. I am not the one who has the skills to challenge this reality, but the light of transparency will help us all. Please enjoy this discussion and reach out if you have any questions or wish to participate. This will be a multi-part podcast. It went longer than I thought it would. And then finally, I'll assemble it as one large production. And one other point in here, come to find out, come to find out, it's not come to find out. But anyway, when we were having this conversation, I made a statement about, I didn't make a statement, I said I didn't know, but that I had heard things about humans and ants and in comparison. So come to find out, we do not know a mass equation to the ants for obvious reasons, that we are vastly varying in mass per unit, both species. So it appears to be about equal, that they're, I'm going to give a context later on, but they're about equal mass of humans per ants. Now, if you think you can count the population and divide it by averages, I mean, maybe we could figure that all out. But when you think about the varying of mass between a baby and certain adults, then just saying our population's 101 and trying to make an equation doesn't really make any sense. In the sense humans are getting fatter, we are gaining ground pretty much. I don't think the population gains ground as much as our fatness does. And as for strict numbers, there are about 150,000 ants per human. So, so the read a thing joking about how at one point in time the ants were probably a good bit more massive than us, but we will end up having more mass than them because we got so fat and they stayed the same. But anyway, so please enjoy.
Nuance. Noun. A subtle difference in or shade of meaning. Expression. Or sound.
Nuance. Noun. A subtle difference
Nuance.
in or shade of meaning.
Noun.
Expression.
A subtle difference in or shade of meaning.
Noun.
Expression.
A
or
subtle
sound.
difference in or shade of meaning,
Nuance.
expression, or sound.
Noun. A subtle difference in or shade of meaning, expression, or sound.
Can't believe this is working out very good like this. So one thing I know, I had to go get my Ethiopian bean of America, and there's one thing I can know about stereotyping, is that a man with a hair as beautiful as yours definitely enjoys coffee.
Talking about me? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. No, well, I work in coffee. I make coffee for a living, I guess. So yeah, no, I work with some really good coffee from all over the world. It's pretty cool, for what it is.
Yeah, I got into the history of it a little bit, that the bee is coming from Ethiopia and where they grow and everything. And it's definitely a fascinating history. And I'm continually amazed about where it can go with the amount of people that drink coffee.
Yeah,
Like
I know.
our consumption level. Like, how
Mhm.
can we possibly keep up with this? Coffee is going to get expensive.
Yeah, I think I've noticed, and this is the same with coffee and beer and wine and almost any of these things that you can get increasingly obsessed and it's like a fractal, like you get deeper into it and they're obsessing about the molecular structure and the type of soil and climate that it grows in and the ways in which it's ground and processed and it's just like it gets into this kind of insane level of detail, which at a certain point I get a little I just get shut. I just shut off. I'm like, I don't care. I don't really care that much to get into it that deeply, but it's interesting for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, have you ever seen when they did that with wine bottles? I mean, I would argue that coffee is different and the soil matters and
Yeah,
everything.
right.
But what are they called with wine? What is that called? Something like a
S
Fossier, something
Simile or
similar.
sommelier.
Yeah, you know what we're talking about.
I
Yes,
think, yeah, like people
whatever.
that are obsessed with all the flavor profile, and they could taste when it was, when it was harvested and where it was harvested and what kind of grape it is and what the flavor profile. It gets into this a kind of absurd level of pretentiousness.
Right, and
Um,
they had those guys though drink it out of these fancy bottles,
yeah.
a- and they were rating them all like really high based on the fanciness of the bottle, not the actual quality of the wine. It was pretty funny.
hmm Yeah. Um,
All right, so do you want to do a little lead in that's like your podcast,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
I'll say something, and
Well,
then we can just get into the first couple of questions.
sure. So I just want to go over this really quick. So the idea was that we have each two questions that we kind of gave each other in advance, and then we have two surprise questions. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think I only have one, but I'll just see where
I have
where it
like
goes.
one, two. I mean, I kind of have a second one I could throw out there depending on where it goes.
Sure,
Um,
we'll just see where it goes. No big deal.
yeah, and so the idea would be, I guess we just take turns asking each of those questions, and then I guess you said something about breaking it up into 10-minute segments, but I mean, obviously we can just do whatever.
Well, yeah, but I was just saying a goal to like if we could cut each question kind of
hmm
like in the confines of that
Sure,
10-minute
sure.
window, because I'll make those videos for IG Live, and then I'll show you how to do that.
hmm
And they're fucking dope, but nobody is doing those cool ass IG Live videos, and they may not help us at all or
Yeah,
anything, but
yeah,
they're
yeah,
fucking cool.
yeah,
So
yeah. No, they are. I saw what you did with our last one that we did. So
And
yeah,
so
no,
this would be both of us with your video, and also it'd be the best one yet for an interview style. So I
yeah,
just thought it would be worth it to try and keep it in those 10 minutes. Because like before, what I've done is just kind of blurred it if there was dumb parts. But I
yeah.
would rather try to keep it whole if possible.
Sure, sure. All right. So yeah, we can just sort of start, and I guess I could be the I don't know if you want to go first with your question. If you want to, I guess the idea would be like say your first question, you'd ask that to me, and then I guess we could just I'll try to answer that to the best of my ability, and then of course you have your contention with that, and kind of try to wrap it up within a certain times constraint, and then move on to my question to you. I guess we can go back and forth. I guess would be kind of the idea. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. My main goal is is just to have the conversation. But if we handle it, what's the word I'm looking for? Like naturally in this context is not going to be the right word. I don't know exactly what word I'm looking for, but if we handle it just how you and I would normally talk, I think we'll end up going too far, and there's no way we're going to keep the 10 minutes
Sure.
unless
Okay.
we say I have 10 minutes where I'm in control, you answer my questions, and then
Right,
we'll
right.
switch.
Yeah, I guess we could just roll with it and just feel it out as we go along and then edit it the
Hmm.
way that we feel is
We're
appropriate.
gonna feel it out as we go along, Patrick. How's this gonna be? I didn't know that that was the wilderness aspect.
Oh, yes, it is. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about
Well,
when my title.
son of a bitch. I dressed wrong.
Yeah, especially for a video.
Yeah, heads
Um,
up next time.
all right, man. Well, we can just go for it. All right. So Michael, I didn't expect that we would be talking to each other so soon after our previous conversation that we had. I guess it was maybe last month or whenever it was, and we talked about your research, your experience into policing and the roots of policing in the United States and crime and where crime comes from and how racism fits into all that. And we had a pretty interesting discussion about that. But recently we sort of had something of an argument, if you want to call it that. I don't know what we would maybe frame it as, but I figured the best thing to do, I think we both agreed, was to just hash it out in a kind of, we use the quotation around this word debate, but something like a discussion about, honestly, I don't know what we're going to talk about exactly because we sort of threw two questions at each other in advance of what we want to discuss, and maybe a couple questions that we're just going to surprise each other with. But the root of what our discussion was initially was an article I had posted about uh, how the barriers along the southern border of the United States, between the United States and Mexico, that was causing ecological disruptions. It was causing disruptions within certain species that are indigenous to that area. And so basically that was all I was doing. You had a contention with that. And so that's led to us talking about not only, I think, ecology, but also, from what I can tell, humanity's role within potentially being a destructive force on this planet, and what your opinions are on that particular subject, and what my opinions are on that particular subject. And of course, basing some of those opinions hopefully on some objective facts. And we'll see where we go with that. So like I mentioned, we had two questions that we had kind of prepared in advance. We sent each other some articles, some scientific papers, some things like that about what some of our ideas I imagine that we have about what we want to discuss in this thing. So you sent me some interesting papers. I sent you some as well. So I guess to maybe start it off, Michael, if you wanted to maybe pose your first question, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, let's just go ahead and pose a question. Mainly, one thing I would like to premise with is
Sure.
that I'm saying this because I think the reason I want to have the conversation is I think you were right when you were talking about how ultimately we're kind of talking about a value system.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where most arguments come from. So the previous conversation we had was on policing. And the big revelation that I had in policing was, this is baffling, but they really start teaching you critical thinking in about your second and third year of your PhD. Now, shouldn't that be the first class?
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, so I started getting to this point where I was trying to apply a critical lens to everything. And I was really seeing how policing and criminal justice in the literature was a science. It wasn't a science, it was a religion. They were basing ideas off of things like, well, look at the FBI data, crime says this is going up. And I'm like, well, fundamentally, that's absolutely not occurring. That is, crime, as you're saying, FBI data, is a measurement of what cops do. It is a measurement of police activity, not a measurement of citizens' activity. So you're basing everything off of this illogical premise. And so then I got it starting in arguing about these ideas. But what I found is that people were really arguing something much more basic. They were arguing rational choice theory. And rational choice theory means that you can set up conditions for an individual. They will analyze and assess those decisions, and then or options, and they will make the best decision because they can evaluate these things in front of you. So for instance, you would say, oh, I want to steal this car, but this car has a 10-year prison sentence and I'm almost guaranteed to get caught. Mm-hmm. Well, then the idea is that you wouldn't, as a human being, go ahead and take that risk because you would have the chance of going to jail and you would analyze it. But human beings do not operate that way. Mm-hmm. So we were arguing about a philosophical philosophy. We were arguing about a philosophy of how human beings behave, and thus how that becomes how they fit into this world, because human beings are biological creatures. So I'm looking at you as this broad category of an environmentalist. Mm-hmm. And I have taken the broad position of humanist. Mm-hmm. So as far as our moral philosophies are concerned, I'm trying to understand the environmentalist, because or why that would matter more than a humanist. Mm-hmm. And then when you're talking about the nature of why humans behave, then we're getting into the actual biology of what people do and what motivates and causes their actions in the end. So how they fit into the system of our matrix. I call it the matrix. So I'm a constructivist, which is the other paradigm that I would have to fall into philosophically, where I essentially see the world as the matrix in the generic sense that it is, with the exception that breaking out of this matrix is absolutely impossible, and understanding reality outside of this matrix is impossible. And the only way we can establish any truth is the scientific method based on replicatability of how things operate in this matrix. Our moral ideas are separate than our practical ideas of what society and reality are for us. If that if that makes any sense, to set the initial guideline. And the government and everybody's taxpayers spent a lot of money making me a very aggressive person. And so I'm hard to talk to, and I need somebody like you to kind of coax these things into more acceptable ways of conversing.
Uh-huh.
As a scientist and applying the scientific method, I'm immediately turned off from environmentalism and the climate change kind of science discussion, because there's this overall idea that they're saying this is occurring.
Mm-hmm.
And science does not say that, ever. So when I hear a group saying they know why something is happening, not that they don't know all the reasons why it's not happening, which is what science does. It proves it's a pursuit of what is not true, not what is true. So the whole kind of narrative around environmentalism and science-wise pulls me back. Morally, it doesn't pull me back, and we'll get into that. But if you like want to save squirrels because they're cute, well, that's the moral argument, and that's a different ballgame. So as much as I could clear that space out getting into this, was it your first question to me or my first question to you?
You can go first. I think your first question would be good.
Okay. So I have a bunch of nonsense notes, and we point out all this literature. But my first question when it comes to environmentalists, I guess, is we're going to delve into the moral aspect, which is, why do we care? So as you mentioned, we started this idea with this pseudo debate about the southern wall and your claim of species destruction, which I doubt is really true. But granting that it is, why should I care?
So your question is, why should we care specifically about the border wall affecting ecology, or why should we care about non-human life?
Why should I care about any wall that humans built affecting another species?
Right. Well, I guess, if I could maybe frame it this way, there's a few ways that we could frame that. If you want to look at it from a completely human-centric perspective, which is to say, how does this affect me? How does this affect my family? How does this affect my career? How does this affect my way of life as it is right now? It may not actually have a direct or at least a short-term impact on human life. Maybe unless you live right by the border and you can maybe somehow the way that it affects the ecology of that region would in fact impact your life in some either small or large way. But for many people, it's not going to have a direct impact. And I think that this does come down to a moral or an argument about what is ethical behavior for human beings, and the impact that humanity as a whole has on other living beings. I can't convince a person to care about anything. I can't convince you or any other human being to care about the fact that certain species are detrimentally impact in their ability to migrate these areas that we call the southern border, which is, in my opinion, is an arbitrary line that was drawn up by the United States
That's not an
it
opinion,
is.
Patrick. That's okay.
Yeah.
All borders are arbitrary.
Yeah, they are arbitrary. Obviously, some people think those are necessary, but I disagree with that for various reasons. But yeah, I would say that it's incredibly arrogant as a species to impose our arbitrary lines, arbitrary borders, not only on other human beings, but in particular on non-human life. I think it is important that we take that into account because, again, while we may not see the effects in the immediate sense, the long-term implications of building barriers or getting in the way of ecologies that have developed and have functioned well for maybe hundreds or thousands or millions of years as a result of, again, political policies. I think that, again, I can't argue or convince a person to care about these things. But I say it's just one piece of a bigger puzzle as to why humanity itself is impoverished in its ability to empathize with other living beings, which in turn impoverishes our ability to empathize with other human beings, right? It's not just the fact that some feline or otherwise some other species are impacted by these borders. Um, it's also the fact that, human beings are trying to seek asylum, and these barriers are meant to prohibit them from crossing some, again, arbitrary line. It seeks to other things. It seeks to other people. It seeks to other non-human life. And I think that's been a long historical process, which we could get into if we so, if we choose to, of course. I think that the way that we think about these things now is not how human beings have viewed these subjects for the majority of our existence as a species. And I don't think that and I do think that it is a particularly cultural phenomenon of not caring about other forms of life, as seeing them as not being connected to the wholeness of life, at least for ourselves. And yeah, I don't know if I at all articulated well enough how I feel about that. But again, I feel like it's a piece of a bigger subject, a bigger issue, a
Sure. So,
larger crisis that we are in the midst of right now.
all right. So what I don't get is, do other animals make barriers?
Yeah, I suppose that there's certain versions of that. I kind of was thinking about this when we were on Facebook talking about this. You were asking this question, um, why is it wrong when a human being builds a dam, for instance, and when beavers do it, it's natural or good, in that sense. And I would say that there's a lot of reasons as to why that's the case. I think that human beings tend to, again, when we build dams, we do it for very specific purposes, which is to generate, say, energy, electric power, which again, I live here in southern Idaho. I'm pretty sure that the power that is generating this laptop and the lights in my apartment right now and the heater that I'm using in great part was generated by a dam that is not too far from where I live. Um, so obviously dams are made for that purpose, to meet certain specific human uh, wants, or maybe in the frame of an industrial civilization, the needs of that industrial civilization in order to continue to function. Uh, but again, that has detrimental impacts on the ecology of the river and on other ecologies that may surround that river as well.
But I
And
mean, beavers have
yeah,
done that. Beavers have
yeah.
vastly destroyed entire environments for other species.
So
So,
yeah,
so you're saying my view of humanity is is arrogant, but I see you placing humanity on this pedestal above all other animals that implies like this divinity, this saviorshipness to the world that I am not understanding, because ours affects another creature. Like, everything affects other creatures. Every
sure,
beaver's dam does it. Every bird's nest affects another creature.
sure.
I mean, this is the cycle of nature. So I'm not understanding why you're placing human beings outside of nature. But that's actually the next question. So, but on this, like when you're talking about barriers, so the barriers are necessary, like the Southern Wall, because of the nation concept. So you have to first defeat the nation concept
Hmm.
before. So you're talking about changing the matrix, and
Hmm.
I like that's level 10 thinking, and I like it's hard for me to care about level 10, because the reality is that we are under a national construct. We do have nations,
Hmm.
so we have to operate under that until you change that paradigm within
Hmm.
society. So then when you're talking about these animals, so on the southern border, for instance, you're not talking about squirrels or snakes or anything like that. They can get through. You're not talking about birds, they'll be fine. You're talking about big animals.
Hmm.
So, but they have measures. Like, I've been to places like this overseas and constructing, preparing for war zone issues. And of course, the phone rings. But the point is, they have these measures. So, and I even looked it up. There's literature on this, and I can send it to you, and we can post it on the show notes or something, about how they put in these certain bridges, so like antelope can cross over in this area, or these other species can get around, and you can do that. So it would be much more practical in the reality of a nation state, and that entire world under that paradigm, to just argue and make sure that you build in avenues where the environment is protected. And yeah, you're making a moral issue there, but it seems so much more practical than trying to convince the world that borders aren't going to, I mean, because it's like, that's so far. It's like I'm trying to convince people that heroin should be legal. The fact of no borders, you're way past my argument being one.
Right, right. Well, I don't know if we should talk about this now, but I do want to address that claim you made that I am placing human beings on a pedestal. In fact, that is the opposite of what I think I would argue. I would actually say that it's because in general, culturally, our values point us towards being superior to the natural world, and that is in fact what makes us think that we can build things like dams, that we can in fact build barriers along arbitrary borders.
I mean, but dude, a beaver's not thinking that.
Yeah, but again, if I could, and I'm not a beaver expert by any means. I'm not a scientist. I want to make this very clear. I talk with scientists. I talk with ecologists. I talk with a lot of these individuals that are experts in their fields. But I would make the contention that beavers are nowhere near are nowhere near detrimentally impacting ecosystems in the way that human beings have and do continuously. The way that a beaver builds a dam is not the way that a human being builds a dam. When a beaver builds a dam, and again, I could be wrong, and I'm sure that there have been detrimental impacts from, say, an
But you're
overabundance of,
arguing scale, right?
right. Hmm.
So then we would be arguing about which species are superior enough to have a say, right?
Hmm.
So you're already saying it, otherwise you're saying the beaver can do what he wants and the human has to submit to the beaver's will, which obviously doesn't make any sense either.
I don't think it's either one or the other. I don't think it's a matter of submitting one to the other, like a human being submitting to the will of the beaver. It's a matter of understanding our role within the broader system. So if
Yeah,
human,
but evolution, our role
Mhm.
is to survive. Fuck all other species. That's
I
our role. I
don't,
mean, every
again,
other species feels the same way about us.
I don't think so. I think that, again, if we want to talk about what scientific research is showing, there tends to be much more of a cooperative quality. Yes, of course, competition plays a vital role within that. Obviously, animals do kill each other. I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to package this as if everybody's just a happy group of hippies, living in the forest together. That's obviously not the case. People,
Wait, Patrick, please. Are you going to make the argument that human beings are more violent than other species? That is preposterous.
no, I'm not making that argument. I would say, though, that systems that exist, for instance, we were talking about the arbitrary nature of borders. I was having an interview with a sociologist named Sinisha Milosevic, and Milosevic, I could say his name incorrectly. I apologize, Sinisha. Um, we're talking about nationalism. We're talking about the formation of national identities. The idea that we have
Yeah,
about
but I'm
nations.
not. But I'm not, Patrick. That's why I'm trying to steer you
Right.
towards the actual argument. I don't care what they're arguing. I don't care what other people are arguing.
Hmm.
I'm trying to ask why our border is less important than a lion's border.
I don't know how to answer that question because I think my main point is that, again, this is tied up in a lot of different things. So when we talk about our
No,
perceptions,
yeah, but
again,
I think,
this is a
but that's
perception
what I'm trying to
issue.
say is we get too far, Patrick. That's level 10. Like, so
Hmm.
that's arguing way past the premise. So you have to establish first who has a right to carry out their will. I mean, that's unavoidable. If you think that you have the right to carry out your will on a lion's border, good luck, fragile ape. It's not going to pan out,
Yeah.
right? So,
Hmm.
so the same rule applies to them. I mean, I have a border around my house, and if you're
Hmm.
a lion, well, don't cross my border.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
So why? Who? I mean, but we're both, the lion and I both have the exact same argument.
so let me try to clarify what you're asking, sorry, could you reiterate what you're asking again, and we could try to get at it again?
Sure. So when the lion has, so like even like chickens, they only go so far. Like all animals have these borders,
Hmm.
so these ranges that they go to. That's their border. So the lion will say only alpha male lions can be in this area, or oh, you can't, as a human being, you can't come near this den. That's their home. That's their wall. That's their
Hmm.
arbitrary line. They arbitrarily set whatever that distance is. I don't get to have a say in that.
Hmm.
And if I, as a dumb ape, walk into their boundary, they have every right to kill me.
Sure.
Just as my boundary tells them where they can go and don't go, unless you are saying one species has a right to make a boundary over another.
I don't know. I have to attribute this to what we define as arbitrary borders or not. I wouldn't say that the boundaries that are set up by, say, lions are at all the same of what human beings are composing right now. I mean,
Yeah,
again,
but see, then you're putting a human on a pedestal. How is it different? I don't understand. You
I don't
can't just
think
say it's
it's
different because it is.
I don't think human beings are being put on a pedestal, but I would argue that the way that human beings organize themselves, the way in which we do draw these borders, is very different from the way other species do in a very general sense. Again, I don't think lions develop nation states. They don't have ideological constructs. They don't build nations and say these
Why
people.
is a tribe any different than a nation state? I mean, just because it's a scaled, that's what I'm saying. You're arguing about scale.
Yeah, and when we talk about human beings, we have to argue about the scale of human beings.
So
We have to
then you're
talk.
making an argument about scale. That's what I'm saying. So
Mhm.
then you're having an arbitrary line about where to draw that line,
Okay,
right?
I guess. I
Right. So
think.
then your argument is scale. So
Mm,
so for instance, I don't remember what the exact numbers are, but for in America, it's like there's 10 pounds of ants for every human being.
mhm.
So they are destroying the environment and altering the environment at a much greater scale than we are.
I don't think so. I think
Yeah, I
that
mean, but these things, like you're talking about objectively, that's what I'm saying. You keep using subjective terms like that, it healthy and well and think so. Like,
sure.
I don't know where to go with that. Like, I can't. I don't understand. As me, as just somebody that is a skeptic, just somebody that's trying to be critical. How can you? How will these arguments convince somebody who's in the negative position?
I'm not trying to convince people. My whole project has been for people that are already in that space to want to understand that. So my whole point is we've already come to some sort of conclusion, I guess you could say. We already have examined the scientific evidence, say, regarding specifically, let's say, climate change. People are coming into this knowing, now what? Because then the questions aren't so much, well, how can we stop it? Because again, or maybe not again, but I would like to say that I personally believe that we're past the point of stopping, uh, runaway climate change. So then the questions then have to be asked, well, then how do we live in a time like this? So again, that's why I made it very clear at the very beginning when we started to discuss doing this. I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to be able to be the most objective on this. And I can't speak on behalf of scientists. I can maybe direct you personally towards ecologists that can differentiate between what a lion or a beaver's boundaries, the difference between that and, say, a human being's boundaries. But I'm going to do the best I can to articulate the feeling that I have, my subjective reasons. And again, there may be some objective facts that exist within that reasoning. But again, my conclusions are my own, and I'll do my best to defend them. But again, I can't be
Hey, if you
100%
want to say,
objective on
hey, it's
this.
because it's what I believe in, God damn it, that's the moral position I have. That's cool.
Yeah,
I just want to get down to
yeah.
what it
So I guess to
is.
answer, if I could try to answer your question, I don't know how to objectively tell you as to why an ecological border or some animal's border is at all any better or worse than human beings, except by looking at the impacts of it. So that's kind of what I think a lot of ecologists point to is they look at the impacts of the barriers along the southern border to other animals, or they look at the impacts of, say, agriculture, modern agricultural systems, and how that impacts biodiversity in many different parts of the world.
Yeah, I get
So
that. I mean, I
yeah,
totally
yeah,
understand what you're saying. It's
yeah.
just that I don't understand how a human being doing it is different than a volcano going
Hmm.
over it in the spectrum of morality of what is nature. But let me wrap this last section up with this, and then we'll move on to your question. So
Sure.
when you're talking about these borders, like you said, we're talking about the bigger animals. So like, do you think these fences would stop apes from getting over them or something like that, or only land like herding animals?
Well, it does impact, obviously, I think there was, if I remember correctly, bobcats and various other felines, predators, various other herding animals like you're mentioning. But also, I think it has an impact on the food chain or the food web, I guess maybe is a better term for it. So if certain animals can't get across certain borders, they can't breed, or they can't, it disrupts their ability to have access to certain food sources. And so even animals that really don't need to,
Because they can't get to the other side of the wall.
yeah, or animals that they rely on for food sources can't get across
So
the
walls
wall.
work.
Walls work for stopping certain ecologies, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Walls work in
Okay,
ways
well
that
then
we
we're
maybe,
settled. The
yeah.
environmentalist agrees that walls work.
I guess so. If you wanna use that sound bite, go for it. Yeah.
It was too easy, Patrick. Come on.
Generally dry day on Wednesday with sunny periods. However, there may be more cloud in the southeast where it will be breezier. After a chilly start, it will be mostly dry on Thursday with some sunny spells. However, it may be rather cloudy in the southeast. Patchy rain will arrive in the north.
These discussions are a deeply personal thing for many of us. There is no media support for science and the pursuit of knowledge. Throughout history, power desires a non-critical populace. I'm not begging for money, but I am pleading that you discuss these issues with the people around you and encourage them to share and subscribe. I'm viewing this work as an attempt to collect information from when people are ready to consume it. That makes this a team effort in the end. The more people that participate, the better discussions we get and the better our outcomes become. I will do my part. You?